In a single New York tenement room in the 1880s, a family of 7 might share 400 square feet of living space with no running water, no bathroom, and almost no ventilation. Yet from these cramped, disease-ridden spaces emerged the workforce that transformed America into an industrial giant virtually overnight. So yeah, if these stories help you sleep, hit subscribe so you don't miss any. Comment where you're at and the time too. Kind of fun seeing all the different places. Someone from Iceland commented once, and I had to Google what time zone that even is. Alright, tonight it's the 1880s in America. But hold on, get cozy first. Seriously, take a second. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. You're not going to want to move once we start. The scraping sound of iron-rimmed wheels on cobblestones pulls Daniel Murphy from sleep before dawn. Before his eyes even open, his body registers the weight of his youngest child who crawled into the shared bed during the night. The stifling air in the small tenement room already carries the smell of boiling cabbage and coal smoke from other apartments. His back aches from the thin corn husk mattress that does little to cushion against the rope bed frame beneath. Unlike the comfortable mattress you're lying on now, this bed offers no comfort, only a slight barrier between a working man and the floor. It's 1882 in New York's Lower East Side, and Daniel has exactly 17 minutes to get himself ready before he needs to leave for the ironworks. 17 minutes to transform from exhausted father to functional machine operator. 17 minutes that will determine whether he earns today's pay or gets replaced by any of the hundreds of desperate men waiting outside the factory gates. Daniel carefully shifts his daughter Sarah back to the pallet she shares with her brother without waking either of them. The room is small, so small that with a single step he can touch the wall that separates their living space from the Kowalskis next door. From the other side, he can hear Mrs. Kowalski's chronic cough, tuberculosis probably. The disease thrives in these buildings where sunlight never reaches and air barely circulates. "You thinking of getting up any time today?" his wife Margaret whispers from the small stove where she's already heating water, her silhouette barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. "Was enjoying my luxury accommodations too much," Daniel replies with a quiet laugh, careful not to wake his mother who sleeps in the room's only chair, her arthritis making a bed impossible. You know what's weird about tenement life? The bizarre intimacy of it. You don't just live with your family, you live with their every sound, smell and bodily function. And not just your family. The paper-thin walls mean you know exactly when Mr. Rossi from upstairs is fighting with his wife, when the twins on the first floor are sick, and which of your neighbours snore like freight trains. Margaret hands Daniel a chipped cup of what passes for coffee, mostly chicory with just enough actual coffee to maintain the fiction. It's hot though, and that's what matters. In the 1880s, that morning cup hit different. It wasn't about flavour profiles or cute barista art. It was fuel, pure and simple. "Thomas already left?" Daniel asks, noticing his son's empty sleeping space. "Had to. Said something about getting a good corner for the morning edition." Daniel nods. At 16, their son has the hustle that might actually get him somewhere in this new America. Newspaper boys who secured prime locations could double their sales, and Thomas has been saving every spare penny. Not for candy or entertainment, mind you. The boy has bigger dreams. Dreams of education that neither Daniel nor Margaret ever had. Looking around their one-room home in the dim light, Daniel takes quick stock of their world. A rope bed shared by him and Margaret, pallets on the floor for the children, a small stove, a table with 3 mismatched chairs, a trunk containing everything they own that isn't currently being worn or used, and one window that opens not to the street but to an air shaft so narrow you could touch both sides if you stuck your arms out. You're probably thinking, why would anyone live like this? Well, when the alternative was starving in Ireland after the potato famine or fleeing religious persecution in Eastern Europe, suddenly a cramped tenement in America seemed like winning the lottery. At least here, there was the possibility of something better. Maybe not for you, but for your kids. Daniel splashes water on his face from the basin, the same water the whole family will use throughout the day, carried up 5 flights of stairs by Thomas last night. Indoor plumbing, that's for the wealthy folks uptown. Here in the tenements, you're lucky if the shared toilet in the backyard isn't overflowing. "Fixed your shirt best I could," Margaret says, handing him his work shirt with newly mended tears where sparks had landed yesterday. The fabric is thin from too many washings, but it's clean, a point of pride for Margaret, who refuses to let her family look like they've given up, despite the circumstances. "You're a miracle worker," he says, feeling the neat stitches with calloused fingers. The skin on his hands is tough as leather now, cracked in places from the constant heat and cold of metalwork. Hands that had once worked a small farm in County Cork now manipulated industrial machines that would have seemed like science fiction to his father. Daniel dresses quickly in the semi-darkness. Privacy is a luxury they can't afford, but they've developed an elaborate choreography of turned backs and averted eyes that creates the illusion of personal space where none exists. I want you to picture this for a second, your entire life. Sleeping, eating, bathing, changing clothes, sickness, arguments, affection, all happening in a space about the size of a modern bathroom. No doors to close, no room to retreat to when you need space. Just constant, unrelenting togetherness. Outside, the city is already waking up. The sound of hooves and carriage wheels creates a constant background rumble. Somewhere nearby, a factory whistle pierces the dawn. It's joined moments later by another, then another, until the air is filled with the industrial equivalent of roosters announcing the day. From other apartments, the sounds of waking families seep through the walls, babies crying, a couple arguing in Italian, someone coughing violently, a man praying in Yiddish. This building houses people from 6 different countries, most of whom can barely communicate with each other except through nods and gestures, yet they're bound together by the shared experience of starting over in America. "Take this," Margaret says, pressing a bundle wrapped in cloth into his hands. Lunch, probably bread with a smear of lard if they're lucky. Daniel knows she's skipping her own meal to make sure he has strength for his 12-hour shift. "The Flannery boy came by yesterday," she continues, voice low. "Said they're hiring at the glass factory. Better pay," he says. Daniel grunts. Better pay because half of them die before 40, glass dust in the lungs. He tucks the lunch into his pocket. "We're making it, Maggie. Thomas has his papers route. Sarah helps with your sewing. We've got more than most." "I know." She straightens his collar in a gesture that's part practicality, part affection. "Just thought you should know." This was the constant calculation of working-class life in the 1880s, weighing slightly better pay against increased risk of death or dismemberment. No workers' compensation back then, no health insurance. You got injured on the job? Tough luck, buddy. There's 50 guys outside who'll take your spot before your blood dries on the floor. Daniel kisses his wife quickly, touches his mother's shoulder gently so as not to wake her but to feel the reassurance of her steady breathing, and takes one last look at his sleeping children. Then he's out the door, joining the river of humanity flowing down the tenement stairs. The stairwell is its own ecosystem. The smell hits him first, a combination of boiled cabbage, unwashed bodies, wet laundry, and the distinct tang of too many humans sharing too little space. The steps themselves are worn in the middle, wooden boards sagging from decades of use. One flight down, Mrs. Abramowitz is already sweeping her small patch of landing. She nods at Daniel, their daily acknowledgement that transcends their language barrier. Second floor. The smell of fresh bread as the Ricci family prepares for their day running a small bakery 2 streets over. The aroma makes Daniel's stomach growl, reminding him that yesterday's dinner was thin soup stretched to feed 5 people. Ground floor. Mr. Giannopoulos sits on a stool by the entrance, smoking his pipe. The old Greek seems to never sleep, functioning as an unofficial watchman for the building. He taps his pipe in greeting as Daniel passes. "Cold one at the factory today," he says, one of the few English phrases he's mastered, used regardless of the actual weather or Daniel's destination. "Always is," Daniel replies with a half smile, completing their daily ritual. And then he's outside, joining the mass of humanity that floods the streets of the Lower East Side each morning. The contrast always hits him like a physical force. Inside the tenement, despite its crowding, there's a certain intimacy. These are people he knows, lives intertwined with his own. Outside, it's a churning ocean of strangers, all moving with the same urgent purpose. The street itself is a sensory assault. In 2025, you probably think you know what a busy street sounds like. Honking cars, rumbling buses, the occasional siren. But the noise of an 1880s New York street was different, more organic, more varied, somehow both louder and more textured. There's the clatter of thousands of hooves on cobblestones, the grinding of iron-rimmed wheels, the calls of street vendors already setting up. Hot corn, get your hot corn. The shouts of children who have escaped apartments to play in the gutters, the barking of stray dogs. The mechanical clang from workshops whose doors stand open to the morning air. And the smell. Oh man, the smell. Horse manure everywhere, rotting vegetables from yesterday's market, sewage from overflowing gutters, smoke from 1,000 chimneys, the tang of unwashed bodies packed tightly together. It's like a physical presence, something you move through rather than simply detect. You're thinking, this sounds awful. Why didn't they do something about it? Well, here's the thing. For most people, this was just normal. They didn't know any different. And if you'd grown up with these conditions, you probably wouldn't even notice most of it. As Daniel navigates the crowded street, he passes evidence of the rapid transformation gripping America. On one corner, workers are installing electric streetlights, cutting-edge technology that will gradually replace the gas lamps that have lit the city for decades. Across the street, a new telephone wire is being strung between buildings, part of the growing communication network that's shrinking distances in ways that would have seemed magical just a generation ago. A horse-drawn omnibus rumbles past, packed with passengers headed downtown, while just a block away, construction continues on the elevated railway that will soon carry electric trains above the street traffic. Old and new, existing side by side in a city reinventing itself daily. 3 blocks from home, Daniel passes a construction site where a new skyscraper is rising, 10 stories tall, an almost unimaginable height made possible by recent advances in steel production and elevator technology. He pauses for a moment, looking up at the skeletal framework. Impressive, isn't it? Daniel turns to find Thomas alongside him, his newspaper bag still full of morning editions. "Shouldn't you be selling those?" Daniel nods at the papers. "Heading there now. Wanted to catch you first." Thomas glances around to make sure no one's listening, then lowers his voice. "Mr. Sullivan at the newsstand says there's talk of a strike at the ironworks." Daniel's jaw tightens. Strikes are dangerous territory. Necessary for better conditions, but often leading to violence and lost jobs. Men have been killed for less. "Just talk for now," he says carefully. "Don't mention it to your mother. No need to worry her." Thomas nods, understanding the unspoken complexities. At 16, he's already learned to navigate the dangerous waters of labor relations, politics, and survival. Childhood doesn't last long in the tenements. Be careful today, his son says, with a seriousness that shouldn't belong to someone so young. Always am. Daniel ruffles his son's hair, a gesture that Thomas would normally protest as too childish, but today he allows it. Sell all those papers and stay out of trouble. They part ways at the next corner, Thomas headed toward the busier commercial streets where businessmen might buy morning papers, Daniel continuing toward the industrial district where smoke already darkens the morning sky. As he walks, Daniel passes other scenes of daily life in 1880s New York, a group of women lined up at a public water pump, waiting their turn with buckets and containers. Children as young as 6 or 7 headed to factories where they'll work alongside adults for a fraction of the pay. A funeral procession, small and sparse, probably for a child, given the size of the coffin. Death is a frequent visitor to the tenements, particularly among the youngest and oldest residents. Near the corner of Orchard and Delancey, a commotion draws his attention. A crowd has gathered around a man standing on a wooden crate, shouting passionately about workers' rights and the need for organization. Daniel slows his pace slightly to listen. "They get rich from your sweat and blood," the man calls out, his accent marking him as another Irish immigrant. "While your children go hungry and your wives work their fingers to the bone, are we not men? Do we not deserve dignity?" Several police officers hover at the edge of the gathering, watching with narrowed eyes. Public speeches like this often end with broken heads and arrests. The speaker knows it too. Daniel can see him constantly scanning the crowd, ready to disappear at the first sign of trouble. One of the policemen makes a move toward the speaker, and like magic, the man vanishes into the crowd, which disperses in multiple directions, the dance of protest and suppression performed daily on the streets of industrial America. Daniel picks up his pace. The ironworks won't wait, and being late means being replaced. The crowd's quick dissolution leaves him thinking about the growing labor unrest spreading through American industries, workers demanding things that seem so basic now. A 10-hour workday instead of 12 or 14, 1 day off per week, safety measures, restrictions on child labor. Wild demands, right? Imagine thinking you deserve to work less than 14 hours a day, or that maybe 8-year-olds shouldn't operate heavy machinery. Absolute madness. The industrial district looms ahead, a landscape of brick factories with tall chimneys belching black smoke into the morning sky. The air grows noticeably thicker here, laden with coal dust and chemical smells. Daniel can feel it coating his lungs with each breath. Another small tax on his health that he can't afford to think about. Outside the ironworks, a crowd of men lingers, the desperate ones hoping for a day's work if someone doesn't show up or gets injured. They watch Daniel with hungry eyes as he approaches the gate, some nodding in recognition, others staring with barely concealed resentment. There, but for the grace of God go I, he thinks, knowing how easily he could be among them. The factory's whistle screams 6 a.m. just as Daniel reaches the entrance. The sound is physical, vibrating in his chest. The massive doors swing open and the waiting workers flow inside like a river finding its course. Inside, the ironworks is a vision of industrial hell that Dante himself might have imagined. Massive furnaces glow orange in the dim light, radiating heat that will become unbearable by midday. The ceiling disappears into darkness above, obscured by hanging clouds of smoke and steam. Huge machines, steam hammers, presses, rollers wait like sleeping monsters to be awakened for the day's work. The noise hits him next, a symphony of industrial production already beginning as the night shift workers finish their tasks. Metal striking metal, steam hissing through pipes, the roar of furnaces devouring coal, men shouting to be heard above the din. It's not just loud, it's all-encompassing, making normal conversation impossible, forcing workers to communicate through gestures and shouts. Daniel makes his way to his station, a massive rolling machine that flattens heated iron into sheets. The night shift operator, Mike Donahue, looks exhausted, his face streaked with sweat and grime, eyes red from smoke and lack of sleep. "Anything I should know?" Daniel asks, practically shouting to be heard. Mike shakes his head. "Same as always. She's running hot on the left side. Watch your hands." He gestures to a spot on his own arm where a bandage peeks out from under his sleeve. "Got careless. Won't make that mistake again." That's the thing about factory work in the 1880s. The machines were designed for efficiency, not safety. No guards on moving parts, no emergency shutoffs, no concept of ergonomics. The human body was just another component in the industrial process, and a remarkably cheap one to replace when it broke down. As Mike leaves, Daniel removes his jacket and rolls up his sleeves, revealing forearms mapped with small burns and scars, the occupational signature of an iron worker. He ties a rag around his forehead to catch the sweat that will soon be pouring down his face. Another rag goes around his neck to protect against sparks. It's not much protection, but it's better than nothing. Around him, the day shift takes their positions. Men nod to each other in greeting, saving their breath and voices for when they'll be needed. Many have worked alongside Daniel for years, forming the kind of bond that comes from sharing daily danger. They move with practiced efficiency, checking equipment, adjusting settings, preparing for the day's production quota. At precisely 6:15 a.m., the floor manager's whistle cuts through the mechanical din. In unison, workers activate their machines, and the real symphony begins, a roaring, clanging, hissing celebration of industrial might that will continue unabated for the next 12 hours. Daniel's job requires constant attention. Sheets of iron, heated to glowing orange in the furnaces, are carried to his rolling machine by two assistants using long tongs. Daniel controls the rollers, adjusting the pressure and speed as the metal passes through, gradually pressing it thinner with each pass. One moment of distraction could mean crushed fingers or worse. The heat is oppressive. Within an hour, every man on the floor is soaked with sweat. By midday, workers will be drinking gallons of water and still cramping from dehydration. Some factories provide water barrels. The ironworks, considered generous by the standards of the time, even adds salt to help workers retain fluids. Many shops weren't so thoughtful. If you wanted water, you brought it yourself or did without. As his body settles into the familiar rhythm of the work, Daniel's mind wanders to his family. Margaret will be heading to the garment workshop where she sews piecework, earning a few extra dollars each week. Sarah, at 12, will clean the apartment, tend to her grandmother, and later help with the sewing Margaret brings home. Thomas will sell papers until mid-afternoon, then perhaps find odd jobs for additional coins. Every member of the family contributing, every penny carefully counted. This was normal for working-class families in the 1880s. The concept of childhood as a protected time of play and education existed only for the wealthy. For everyone else, children were economic assets who began contributing to family survival as soon as they were physically capable. The morning progresses in a blur of heat, noise, and exertion. Daniel's world narrows to the machine before him, the glowing metal, the movements of his assistants. They establish a rhythm together, maximizing output while minimizing risk. Words become unnecessary. They communicate through nods, gestures, and the occasional shout when needed. Somewhere in the factory, there's a cry of pain, quickly swallowed by the mechanical noise. No one looks up, no whistle stops the work. Later, they'll learn who was injured and how badly. But for now, the machines demand attention. Production doesn't stop for missing fingers or crushed hands. Think about that for a second. Someone gets seriously injured and work just continues, not because the other workers don't care, but because stopping isn't an option. Miss your quota, lose your job. In a world with no safety net, unemployment wasn't just an inconvenience. It was potentially a death sentence for your family. By mid-morning, the temperature in the factory is well over 100 degrees. Sweat drips into Daniel's eyes, temporarily blinding him at a crucial moment. He jerks back instinctively, avoiding a serious burn but catching a small spark on his forearm that leaves yet another mark to join the constellation already there. "Careful!" shouts Patrick, one of his assistants, though the warning comes too late. Daniel nods acknowledgement and returns to his position. No time to dwell on near misses. In the ironworks, like most factories of the era, you're never more than a moment away from disaster. The men who survive are the ones who develop an almost supernatural awareness of their surroundings, who can sense when something's wrong before they consciously see it. At noon, a whistle signals the brief lunch break, 30 minutes to rest, eat, and recover enough strength for the afternoon shift. The machines don't fully stop, the furnaces can't be allowed to cool, but production pauses as the first shift of workers steps back from their stations. Daniel finds a relatively cool spot near a partially open window and unwraps Margaret's lunch bundle. Bread with a thin spread of lard, just as he expected, plus an unexpected luxury. A small apple, probably purchased at slight discount due to a bruise on one side. The fruit would have cost at least 2 cents, an extravagance that makes him both grateful and slightly worried about the family budget. As he eats, he observes the factory from this rare moment of stillness. The scale of the operation is impressive. Hundreds of men working in coordinated chaos to transform raw materials into the building blocks of modern America. The iron they produce today might become rails for the expanding railroads, or structural elements for new skyscrapers, or components for the machines that are transforming every aspect of American life. It's strange to think that he, an immigrant who grew up in rural Ireland, is now part of this industrial revolution. His father had farmed the same small plot for his entire life, using tools and techniques unchanged for centuries. Daniel operates machinery that didn't exist when he was born. His children are growing up in a world being reinvented daily. Progress, they call it. But sitting here, surrounded by conditions that crush body and spirit alike, Daniel sometimes wonders about the cost of this progress, and who pays it. Before this thought can fully form, the whistle blows again. Lunch break over, back to the machines for another 6 hours. As he returns to his station, Daniel catches sight of a well-dressed man walking the factory floor, accompanied by the owner, Mr. Harrison. The visitor has the unmistakable look of wealth, fine clothes, clean hands, the confident posture of someone who is never worried about his next meal. Probably an investor or business associate being given a tour of the operation that generates his comfortable income. The contrast is stark. The visitor's suit probably cost more than Daniel will earn in months. The gold watch chain visible across his vest represents years of an ironworker's wages, yet he passes through the hellish conditions of the factory floor with nothing more than a handkerchief pressed occasionally to his nose, his expression a mixture of fascination and faint distaste. This was the reality of the Gilded Age, a thin veneer of spectacular wealth overlaying the harsh conditions that produced it. While industrialists built mansions with dozens of rooms, multiple families crammed into single-room tenements. While the upper class worried about which fork to use at dinner, the working class worried about having dinner at all. The afternoon drags on, each hour feeling longer than the last as fatigue sets in. By 4 p.m, Daniel's arms burn with exhaustion, his back a knot of pain from the repetitive motion. Still, the rhythm continues. Still, the iron flows through the rollers. The machine doesn't care about human limitations. Around him, he can see similar strain on his co-workers' faces, men moving more slowly, making small mistakes that they catch just in time. This is when accidents happen, in these late hours when muscles are weak and attention frays. Daniel forces himself to focus, to check and double-check each movement. At 5:30 p.m, preparations begin for the handover to the night shift. Machines are adjusted, logs updated, critical information passed along. By 6 p.m, as the final whistle blows, Daniel feels hollowed out, his body running on reserves he didn't know he had. As he retrieves his jacket, now Mike Donahue appears again, looking marginally more rested than he had 12 hours earlier. They exchange brief updates about the machine's performance, continuing the unbroken chain of production that runs 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. Outside, the evening air feels shockingly cool after the inferno of the factory floor. Daniel's sweat-soaked clothes cling uncomfortably to his skin, but the air is so polluted with industrial smoke that it barely qualifies as fresh. Still, it's better than what he's been breathing all day, and he fills his lungs gratefully. The streets have a different energy now. The morning's purposeful flow has been replaced by a more complex pattern. Workers heading home mix with people beginning their evening activities. Street vendors hawk hot food to those too tired to cook. Children play in the last light of day. Saloons fill with men seeking brief comfort before heading to crowded homes. Daniel joins the river of humanity flowing back toward the tenement districts. His body moves automatically, following the familiar route while his mind drifts. 12 hours of mechanized work has left him feeling slightly detached, as though he's observing the world rather than participating in it. This sensation, this emotional numbing, was a common experience for industrial workers. The monotony, the noise, the danger, all combined to create a kind of protective dissociation. You couldn't fully engage with your surroundings for 12 straight hours and maintain your sanity. So you developed the ability to be physically present while mentally elsewhere. As he walks, Daniel passes signs of the transforming nation, a telephone company office with a sign advertising long-distance calls to Boston, a shop window displaying the latest Edison phonograph, a newsboy, not Thomas, shouting headlines about President Arthur's policies and railroad expansions. The America of 1882 exists in a strange liminal space between old and new. Horse-drawn carriages share streets with electric trolleys. Gas lamps stand alongside electric lights. Traditional craftsmen work in the shadows of mechanized factories. It's a nation in the midst of reinventing itself, and the speed of change is both exhilarating and terrifying. The sun is setting as Daniel reaches his neighborhood, casting long shadows between the tenement buildings. The streets here are crowded with evening life. Women chatting as they prepare communal meals in the open air to avoid heating their already stifling apartments. Children playing games with improvised toys. Old men smoking pipes on stoops. As he climbs the stairs to his family's apartment, Daniel feels the familiar transition from public to private space, though the boundary is far more permeable than in modern homes. The sounds and smells of dozens of other families permeate the building, creating a complex sensory landscape that is both intrusive and oddly comforting in its familiarity. Opening the door to his family's single room, Daniel finds a scene of domestic activity that contrasts sharply with the industrial hell he spent his day in. Margaret and Sarah sit by the window, taking advantage of the last natural light to work on sewing. Thomas reads aloud from a tattered schoolbook, helping his sister learn the lessons he received in the few years of education he managed before work became necessary. Grandmother Murphy shells peas for dinner, her gnarled fingers moving with surprising dexterity. This moment, this small pocket of family connection amid harsh conditions, this is what it was all for. This is what made the crushing labour and dangerous conditions worthwhile. The chance for something better, if not for himself, then for Thomas and Sarah. As Daniel steps into the room, his family looks up, their faces brightening. In their eyes, he isn't just another replaceable cog in the industrial machine. Here, he matters as an individual. Here he is irreplaceable. "Pa," Sarah exclaims, jumping up to greet him. "Thomas taught me multiplication today." And just like that, Daniel crosses the threshold between the America of iron and steam and industry into the America of hope and family and possibility. Two worlds that exist simultaneously, each impossible without the other, both part of the complex tapestry that is being woven in this pivotal decade. The sun sets fully behind the crowded skyline of 1882 New York, ending another day in the life of one ordinary family in an extraordinary time. While the Murphys prepare for evening in their tenement room, across town the electric lights begin to glow in the mansions of Fifth Avenue. The same nation, but worlds apart. While Daniel operates machines at the ironworks, Margaret Murphy has been awake since 4:30 a.m., preparing for her own labour. By the time the rest of the family stirs, she's already washed her face in the same basin of water they'll all share, pinned her hair tightly, and laid out the day's tasks for Sarah. Now, as the morning fully takes hold, she navigates the crowded streets toward Mrs. Goldstein's garment workshop. Unlike the massive factories that employ hundreds, this is a smaller operation. 20 women crammed into a converted apartment, each hunched over pieces of clothing that will eventually be sold in the fine department stores uptown. The transition from home to workshop is barely noticeable. The same crowding, the same poor ventilation, the same noise, just different people making different things. Inside, the familiar scene greets her. Long tables where women sit shoulder to shoulder, bent over their work, the constant motion of needles and thread, the snip of scissors, the murmur of conversation in a half-dozen languages, English, Yiddish, Italian, German, Polish, Russian, creating a babble that somehow works as a cohesive communication system. "Margaret over here," Rosa Abramowitz waves from her usual spot. At 19, she's one of the youngest women in the shop, but her fingers fly over the fabric with remarkable speed. She's also one of the few who can move between the various language groups, having picked up bits of each with the quick ear of youth. Mrs. Goldstein, the shop's owner, looks up from examining a finished shirtwaist. "You're late, Mrs. Murphy." "My apologies," Margaret says, though she's actually right on time. This is just part of their daily routine. Mrs. Goldstein acting stern, the workers apologising for imagined infractions, everyone playing their roles. "The Henderson order must go out today. We need 50 pieces by 4 o'clock. Mrs. Goldstein points to a pile of pre-cut fabric. "Your usual section." Margaret nods and takes her place at the table. Piecework, getting paid by the item rather than the hour, means that every minute counts. No breaks for daydreaming or rest. The faster she sews, the more she earns. Simple as that. Next to her, Rosa chats as they work, her hands never slowing. "Did you hear about the fire at Klein's workshop? 3 girls dead, locked doors, they say. Nobody could get out." Fires were the nightmare of every garment worker. Flammable fabrics, oil from sewing machines, rooms full of lint and dust, add locked doors, a common practice to prevent theft and unauthorized breaks, and you had the perfect recipe for tragedy. Sarah told me, Margaret replies, remembering her daughter's wide eyes as she related the news. One of them lived in our building. They're saying the Triangle factory has the same conditions. Locked doors, no fire escapes. Rosa's voice drops. Some of the girls are talking about a union. Margaret's fingers falter for just a moment before resuming their steady rhythm. Unions are dangerous territory, not just because of the risk to jobs, but because of the violence that often follows organising efforts. Still, something must change. Too many dead girls, too many crushed men, too many children working when they should be learning. Talk is cheap, Margaret says carefully, aware that Mrs. Goldstein might be listening. Action costs. Rosa nods, understanding the unspoken message. They turn their attention fully to the shirtwaists, their fingers working with mechanical precision. The garment industry in the 1880s was a strange paradox. On one hand, it offered rare employment opportunities for women, providing crucial income for families teetering on the edge of poverty. On the other, it exploited these same women mercilessly. Long hours, poor conditions, minimal pay, and constant risk of injury or death. You know what's wild? A fancy shirtwaist that Margaret might spend an hour making for 15 cents would sell for $3 or more in a department store. That's a 2,000% markup. And if she complained, well, there were 100 more women desperate for her spot. Midway through the morning, the workshop door opens to admit a well-dressed woman. Mrs. Henderson herself come to check on her order. The contrast between her and the workers is striking. Her dress alone probably cost more than any of these women make in a month. The single feather in her hat might represent a week's groceries for a family of 5. The workers don't pause, but there's a subtle shift in the room's energy. Backs straighten slightly, hands move a fraction faster, pride and resentment mingle in equal measure. Mrs. Henderson glides through the cramped space, examining the work with a critical eye, occasionally stopping to comment on a stitching pattern or colour choice. She shows no awareness of the women as people. They might as well be extensions of their sewing machines. The blue trim on the cuffs is lovely, she tells Mrs. Goldstein, fingering a finished piece. My customers will adore it. So fresh for spring. As she passes Margaret's station, Mrs. Henderson pauses, watching the precise movement of the needle. You have a skilled hand, she comments, not speaking directly to Margaret, but about her, as if discussing a particularly clever animal. Thank you, ma'am, Margaret responds, not looking up from her work. I learned as a girl in Ireland. Oh, you speak English quite well. The surprise in Mrs. Henderson's voice reveals her assumption that all immigrant workers are essentially the same, foreign, uneducated, interchangeable. We speak English in Ireland, ma'am, Margaret says, her tone perfectly respectful, while the words themselves carry a subtle correction. It's our native tongue for many of us. Mrs. Henderson blinks, momentarily confused by this disruption to her worldview, then moves on without further comment. Rosa suppresses a smile beside her. These tiny victories, these moments of quiet dignity, are sometimes all that get them through the day. Across town, Thomas Murphy has secured his preferred corner for selling newspapers. It's a prime location where businessmen emerge from the elevated train station, many looking to purchase a morning paper before heading to their offices. Extra railroad strike violence in Pittsburgh, 5 dead in clash with Pinkertons, Thomas calls out, waving the New York Herald dramatically. The actual headline is significantly less sensational, but no newsboy worth his salt sells papers without a bit of embellishment. His technique works. Several men approach, handing over their pennies in exchange for the latest news. Thomas makes the transactions quickly, careful to maintain the delicate balance of being helpful without appearing servile. Dignity matters even when you're 12 and selling papers on a street corner. Between customers, he keeps a watchful eye on his surroundings. The street is a complex ecosystem with its own rules and hierarchies. Knowing who to avoid, who to befriend, and who to watch can mean the difference between a profitable day and a dangerous one. There's Officer Sullivan making his rounds, twirling his nightstick. He's generally fair with the newsboys as long as they stay out of trouble. The fruit vendor on the opposite corner who sometimes trades bruised apples for day-old papers. The gang of older boys who control the territory 2 blocks south and demand protection payments from younger kids working their turf. Hey, Irish. Thomas tenses at the call, recognizing the voice of Butch Williams, leader of the Corner Boys who've been trying to expand their territory northward. "Little busy here, Butch," Thomas responds, deliberately turning his attention to a potential customer approaching. Butch saunters closer, flanked by 2 of his regular companions. At 15, he's already developed the hard look of someone who expects life to be a constant battle. "This is our corner now. 5 cents a day for you to work here." The businessman who was approaching diverts his path, wanting no part of the brewing confrontation. Thomas sighs internally. This dance again. We've been through this. Sullivan says this corner is fair game for anyone. Take it up with him if you've got a problem. Butch steps closer, his intention clearly intimidation. "Sullivan ain't here right now, is he?" Actually, he is. Thomas spots the officer rounding the corner, his attention immediately drawn to the cluster of boys. "Problem here, lads?" Sullivan calls out, his Irish brogue thickening as it always does when he's asserting authority. Butch's demeanour transforms instantly. "No sir, officer, just saying good morning to my friend Thomas here. Awful lot of boys for a simple good morning." Sullivan's eyes narrow. "Perhaps you'd be better off selling your papers over on Cedar Street." The message is clear. Butch forces a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. "Just heading there now, sir." He turns to Thomas, keeping his voice low. "This ain't over, Irish." As Butch and his boys retreat, Thomas nods appreciatively to Officer Sullivan. These small alliances are crucial for survival on the streets. A friendly policeman, a sympathetic shopkeeper, the other newsboys who watch your back. No one makes it alone. "Thanks," Thomas says simply. Sullivan taps his nightstick against his palm. "Your father still at the ironworks?" "Yes, sir. 3 years now." "Good man, your father. Tell him Mike Sullivan says hello." With that, he continues his patrol. This was the complex web of connections that immigrants created. Irish looking out for Irish, Italians for Italians, Jews for Jews. Not because of any inherent distrust of others, but because these shared backgrounds created instant understanding. Officer Sullivan didn't need Thomas to explain why selling papers mattered, why territory disputes were serious business, or why a day's lost earnings could mean a family going hungry. He knew because he'd lived it himself or seen his own family live it. The morning rush begins to thin as 9 o'clock approaches. Thomas does a quick count of his remaining papers and the coins in his pocket. A decent morning, but not exceptional. He'll need to find a new angle for the midday edition if he wants to make his target for the day. Maybe the financial district for lunch, or perhaps the ladies shopping on Broadway in the afternoon. Each location has its own rhythm, its own customers, its own approach. Learning these patterns is essential for maximizing sales. A street musician sets up nearby, his violin case open for coins. The simple melodies draw a small crowd, creating a momentary pause in the city's relentless forward motion. Thomas watches, calculating whether the crowd might include potential customers or if he should move to a more profitable location. The musician catches his eye and nods slightly, an acknowledgement between two people trying to make a living on the streets. Thomas returns the nod. No competition here, just different hustles in the same space. This was a key survival skill in 1880s urban America. Knowing when to compete and when to cooperate. Resources were scarce, opportunities limited. Those who navigated these waters successfully were those who could read the social landscape accurately and adjust accordingly. Back in the tenement, 12-year-old Sarah Murphy moves through her morning routine with practiced efficiency, with her mother at the garment workshop, her father at the ironworks, and Thomas selling papers. She's effectively in charge of the household until evening. First priority: water. The family's bucket is nearly empty, which means a trip to the public pump in the courtyard. Sarah grabs the bucket and heads downstairs, joining the line of women and children waiting their turn. Ahead of her, Mrs. Petrovich from the third floor argues with Mrs. O'Brien from the second about who was in line first. Behind her, 8-year-old Vinnie Rossi bounces impatiently, his own bucket almost as big as he is. The pump is community theatre, a place where the building's dramas play out daily against the backdrop of this most essential task. "Did you hear about the Flanagan boy?" Mrs. O'Brien's voice carries down the line. "Consumption, they're saying. Doctor gave him 3 months." Tuberculosis, consumption, was the constant spectre haunting tenement life. The crowded conditions, poor ventilation, and shared air made it spread like wildfire once it found a foothold. Everyone knew someone who had died of it, and everyone lived in fear of the telltale cough that might signal their own infection. Sarah tries not to think about the fact that Mrs. Kowalski next door has been coughing for months now, about how the sound travels through the thin walls at night, about how much thinner the woman looks each time Sarah sees her. When her turn at the pump finally comes, Sarah works the handle vigorously, filling her bucket with the questionable water that passes for clean in the tenements. It's not the clear, pure water you might imagine. It's slightly cloudy, with a faint metallic taste, but it's what they have. Carrying the full bucket back up 5 flights of stairs is a test of strength and balance. Spill too much and it means another trip down. By the time she reaches the apartment, her arms ache, but she's managed to keep most of the precious liquid. Inside, Grandmother Murphy has already begun her own work for the day, mending a pair of Thomas's trousers that have torn at the knee. Her fingers, twisted with arthritis, move slowly but precisely, each stitch placed with care born from decades of practice. "You got the water, good girl," she says without looking up. "Now check on the Kowalskis. Mrs. Kowalski was coughing something fierce in the night." Sarah sets down the bucket and nods. This is another part of tenement life. Neighbours checking on neighbours, creating an informal support network in the absence of official help. She grabs a small jar of the honey that her mother has been saving for just this purpose and heads next door. She knocks softly, then a bit louder when there's no response. Finally, the door opens to reveal Mr. Kowalski, his face haggard from lack of sleep. "Sarah Murphy," she introduces herself unnecessarily. Of course he knows who she is. Ma sent honey for Mrs. Kowalski's cough. Mr. Kowalski takes the jar with a nod of thanks. Behind him, Sarah can see Mrs. Kowalski lying on their bed, a thin sheet covering her despite the room's warmth. Her cheeks are flushed with fever, her breathing laboured. "The doctor," Sarah begins hesitantly. "Has he—" $5, Mr. Kowalski says, his accent thick with fatigue and worry. $5 to come. Where I get $5? It's not really a question, and Sarah has no answer to offer. $5 is nearly a week's wages for many workers. The choice between medical care and feeding your family is no choice at all for most. Evening in the tenements has its own rhythm, different from the mechanized cadence of daytime labor. As families reunite in their tiny spaces, the building transforms from a collection of empty rooms to a vibrant, overcrowded hive of humanity. The Murphy apartment is no exception. By 7 p.m., all 5 family members have returned, filling the small room with movement, conversation, and the mingled smells of bodies that have worked hard in summer heat. 15 papers left over, Thomas announces, emptying his coin pouch onto the table for the family accounting. This daily ritual, pooling the family's earnings, is treated with appropriate solemnity. In an economy where pennies matter, even children understand the weight of financial contribution. Good day. Daniel nods, adding his own pay envelope. Unlike Thomas's loose coins, his wages come in an official packet, his name scrawled on the outside. Inside is exactly $1.75. Today's pay minus the 25 cents automatic deduction for the company store where workers are expected to purchase their tools and supplies. Margaret adds her earnings from the garment shop, plus shows the extra piecework she's brought home. 3 cents each if we can finish them by Friday. Together they count the day's intake. Survival for another day, perhaps a bit extra for the always growing list of necessities. No one mentions how Daniel's pay is 15 cents short of last week. No one needs to. The shrinking paycheck could mean anything from reduced orders to a first warning from management who've heard whispers of his interest in the Iron Workers Union. Sarah tends the small pot of soup still simmering on the stove, adding the last precious ingredients: a carrot saved from yesterday, a handful of beans soaked since morning, a few scraps of salt pork for flavour. The single room fills with the aroma, triggering a collective stomach growl that breaks the serious mood and sends them all into laughter. Sounds like music, Grandmother Murphy says with a wink. A whole Murphy symphony. This was how you survived the hardship, finding humour in small moments, making lightness where there was none, creating joy from nothing but shared experience and the human capacity for laughter. Dinner in a tenement was nothing like modern meals. No separate courses, no individual plates, just the communal pot, a loaf of bread, and perhaps a bit of cheese or fruit if times were good. The Murphys eat together, passing a shared spoon for the soup, tearing chunks from the day-old bread that Margaret got at discount from the bakery. Mrs. Kowalski's worse, Sarah reports between bites. Mr. Kowalski says the doctor wants $5 to come. Daniel and Margaret exchange looks loaded with unspoken communication. $5 is impossible, nearly half a week's wages, yet the Kowalskis are neighbours, and in the tenements, neighbourly bonds can be as strong as family. I'll speak with Father Donovan tomorrow, Margaret says, finally. The parish sometimes helps with medical needs. Thomas looks up from his soup. I heard St. Vincent's Hospital takes charity cases. Maybe they could go there. Nobody comes back from charity hospitals, Grandmother Murphy mutters. You go in standing and come out lying down, if you know what I mean. She's not entirely wrong. Public hospitals in the 1880s were places of last resort, often understaffed, unhygienic and overwhelmed. Many saw them as death houses rather than places of healing. Private doctors were expensive, but at least offered the comfort of home treatment. The O'Malleys on the second floor, Daniel says slowly. Their eldest is at medical school now. Perhaps he could take a look, for practice like. This was another crucial survival mechanism, knowing who in your community had useful skills or connections. The informal economy of favours and bargains that operated alongside the cash economy, especially among immigrant groups. I'll ask in the morning, Sarah volunteers, already planning her approach. With dinner finished, they transition to evening work. No leisure time here. Every waking hour needs to be productive when margins are so thin. Daniel repairs a loose floorboard that's been catching on Margaret's skirt. Margaret and grandmother begin work on the extra sewing, their fingers moving with practiced precision despite the day's accumulated fatigue. Thomas reviews the headlines from today's papers, preparing to share news with the family. This evening ritual of news sharing serves multiple purposes. It keeps the family connected to the wider world beyond their immediate struggles. It helps Thomas practice his reading, and it provides a framework for Daniel and Margaret to impart values and perspectives to their children through discussion of current events. President Arthur gave a speech about civil service reform. Thomas begins, squinting at the small print in the fading light. Says government jobs should go to qualified people, not just friends of politicians. Daniel can't contain his skeptical reaction. And I'm sure the politicians are falling all over themselves to give up their patronage powers. "What's patronage?" Sarah asks, looking up from where she's sorting fabric scraps by colour, even the smallest pieces saved for quilting or patching. "It's how the world works, little one," Grandmother Murphy answers before Daniel can. "Those with